Here we go. Hey, Jeb, how's it going?
It's going amazing.
Man, you're amazing, man. You're one of the elite.
Oh, well, thank you very much for saying that.
You know, in other sports, you could have a bad game, a bad basketball game, a bad football game. But in base jumping and skydiving, you really can't have a bad jump.
Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way. There's varying degrees of bad, right? So you could have a bad jump where you break a leg or break a foot or break something. I mean, the reality is, yeah, I get what you're saying. If things go really bad for us, it usually equals dying. So you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. You know, you want to avoid those type of bad days.
When you jump in hot weather versus extreme cold, is there a different approach on the cold weather jumps?
Yes. If you're jumping in like really cold weather, like for instance, we did a project at the Matterhorn in Switzerland, and we were jumping from 16,500 feet in very cold, snowy conditions. And your concern usually is your hands freezing. Because if your hands freeze, then you can't actually reach back and deploy your parachute. So you have to it's funny because you wear these gloves to keep your hands warm, but you have to have tactile so you can still feel your pilot chute. So there's like this balance between having something thick enough and warm enough to keep your hands from freezing, but then being able to still get to your pilot chute and deploy a parachute. So yes, you definitely have to deal with this idea of freezing your hands. And I've been on many jumps where my hands have gotten so cold that I can't move them. So yes, you do have to take being very, very cold into consideration for sure.
I just saw your video of the Balls Pyramid when you're in that R-44 and you're flying by, and you have this smile on your face like, how cool, I get to fly by this thing. But I was fooled. I thought they were going to drop you off at the tip.
Well, originally the goal was to be dropped off on top. But what turned out to happen is the location is highly protected, and no human beings are allowed to even set one foot on Balls Pyramid. They found a small stick insect that's prehistoric, and it's the only place in the world that they exist anymore. And because of that, the Balls Pyramid has now become a super ultra protected zone. So you are not allowed to get on it. Because of that, we had to change our plan, which was then to jump in the helicopter and fly by it, which was still a very cool project. It's still very beautiful. A lot of people that don't realize that, you know, Balls Pyramid is located 600 nautical miles off the east coast of Australia. And it's so remote and so far out in the middle of nowhere that it's very difficult to actually get helicopters to where it is. So if you know, a Robinson 44 does not have that kind of range, period. So in order to get the helicopter out there was very challenging. It was very difficult. And it made the project much more unique because you don't see footage of people with helicopters by Balls Pyramid. So it was a truly wonderful experience, and it was one of the first truly alien locations I've ever been to, where you jump out of a helicopter and it's just a 2,000-foot spike sticking out of the water and just nothing as far as the eye can see. And it was a very special thing. It's hard to describe it. The sensation, the feeling, the visual was spectacular. It really was an amazing experience.
Well, your face says a lot when you're flying over it and you're also getting picked up.
Yeah.
So you have these emotions that don't need no words. So
yeah, no, it was really one of the top experiences I've had in my life. And I have to say that Balls Pyramid is next to an island, a little tiny island called Lord Howe Island. And Lord Howe Island may be one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my entire life. It's a very difficult place to describe. Only 300 people live on the island, and only 300 people are allowed to visit the island at any one time. So there's never more than 600 people on this island. And it kind of reminds me of if you went to like French Polynesia and then you combined like Tahiti with Switzerland. because it has like this kind of jungle Tahiti feel to it, but everything is perfectly manicured, like as if it was Switzerland. So it's a very unique looking place that like I said, I've never been anywhere that's even remotely so. It's really, really spectacular.
To me, your coolest jump was the Heaven's Gate jump.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How about for you? Which one do you put on top? You have to pick one, just because.
You know, there have been so many of them, and different ones are amazing for different reasons. Heaven's Gate, where I flew through the cave in China, was very unique at the time. No one had ever flown through a mountain before. Like no one had ever flown through a cave. It was the first time that had been done. And up to that point, you know, we weren't even sure if it was possible. Like if you had told me 5 years before I did that I was going to do something like that, I would have told you that was physically impossible. Like human beings were incapable of doing that kind of thing. So the project itself was really special at the time. Obviously, since then, people have flown through like smaller holes, and you know, but that doesn't matter what happened afterwards. All that matters is what happened right then and there, and the experience of going through it was very powerful. And the fact that it was a live show also made it really complicated. Like a lot of people don't realize that it's really easy to go with your buddies and go out in the wilderness and, you know, find some really special thing to fly and then just be able to wait for the weather to be perfect and just do it when you feel like it. It's different when you're told in 6 months from now on September 12th at 3 o'clock, you're going to jump out of this helicopter and you're going to do this. And that's a very tricky thing because live television adds a lot of components to it that make it complex. Now you've got hundreds of people, cameras everywhere, satellite trucks, it's being sent around the world. And if the weather is bad at that moment, it creates a very high level of stress. So live television makes things always way more complicated. And the feeling you get when you're doing a live project is way more terrifying because you give these like parameters of what's safe. Like, okay, this is the amount of wind we can handle. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say it's 10 miles an hour. Let's just say 10 miles an hour is what your cutoff point is. Anything past 10 miles an hour, the project's over, right? You get shut down. And that's a horrible feeling to have, to be under, like literally the weather is what you're being controlled by. You have no control over it whatsoever. And you can literally let down, you know, millions of people if it just gets windy or it starts to rain on you. Right. You know, so that's a scary thing, and that's a terrible thing. And what I've noticed is in most of my live shows that I've done, because I've done quite a few of them now, the weather is always right at that. If your cutoff point is 10, it's 9. Like the way it'll literally be like right at the edge of whatever you're capable of doing is what it always seems to be. And yeah, so that one was very special because it was my first time doing a really big, massive live show on the level of what that was. And it was, like I said, the first time a person had ever flown through a cave, and we still weren't really sure if it was doable. And we ran into all kinds of weather issues and permitting issues, and I didn't get the helicopter in time, and I didn't get to do the proper training. And there was like a lot of big issues that wrapped around it that made it really terrifying. So yes, that one was super special. Then I'd say my next one that was really super special probably would have been hitting a target on top of the Great Wall of China. We put a target with a bullseye the size of an apple, and the goal was to put a GoPro that was on my helmet through that bullseye, suspended over the Great Wall. And again, super complicated, weather problems. We had actually set the target up on the actual Great Wall of China itself, which was like a huge thing. But then a week before, a bunch of reporters had seen this structure we built on the Great Wall and had a complete fit about it because it's a, you know, one of the wonders of the world. And they did not like that we built a structure on top of the Great Wall of China. So the government came in and took down our structure. And without the structure, we couldn't hit a target on it. So then we had to like quickly make adjustments and changes. And we ended up setting a target up on a cliff that was with the Great Wall of China going under it. So we still were hitting a target over the Great Wall, but we had to make adjustments. And then we had really bad weather. And then I almost died on both of my live jumps. And it was just, again, super terrifying, super difficult, super complicated. And no one who wasn't there really understood the complexities of what was involved. You know, and that's another thing with live television is you see so little of what's actually happening, you know, and the reality of what's going on behind the scenes to pull something like that off is monumental. It's monumental. So those two projects were probably two of my more powerful ones, simply because of just the complexity involved in pulling them off. So
that is actually my next question, because I am a fellow skydiver and I know the complexities of a skydive. I mean, anything can make you move any direction. Any little thing can go wrong. You got to fix stuff. The altitude that you start to skydive is the altitude that I pull my parachute.
Yeah, most of the time, yeah.
Right? Or less.
Yeah.
And your margin of error is so tiny and people don't realize it. I mean, I don't think people give enough respect for the risk taking, the amount of everything that you do to.
Well, I think that, you know, wingsuit proximity flying especially has created a new kind of place in base jumping. So base jumping's been around for decades and decades. And I think that the general public and the people participating in regular base jumping, like before the wingsuit came into existence, the general population, I don't think, really grasped what was happening. When they saw it as a nightmare, like this horrifying, like falling from a building to your death nightmare. No one saw that as a dream. No one saw that as a wonderful thing. They just saw it as scary, terrifying, and just death. Like they saw it as a death thing, right? And the people participating in it, even they were super horrified by it. Because again, you're falling close to an object, there's 100 different things that can kill you, and it's a terrifying experience. So you get very scared, and it would be an adrenaline kind of experience. Like you would be hyped up, and it would amp you, and it would terrify you. And I would equate it to more of a nightmare than a dream. When the wingsuits came in, everything shifted. And all of a sudden, not only the participants, but the people watching it started kind of connecting to it in a very different way. And it became more of that dream people used to have as a kid of, you know, jumping off their bed, flying around their room, going out the window, flying down the street, and that actual dream of flying. And all of a sudden people connected to it in a way where it was no longer a nightmare. Like it was no longer a scary thing. Now it was much more of just a beautiful experience of actually living this dream of flying. So regular base jumping was a nightmare, whereas wingsuit base jumping was a dream. It was this flying magical dream. And I think that's a problem. That became an issue with wingsuit proximity flying, because you're no longer scared of what you're doing. It's not a scary thing. There's nothing scary about wingsuit proximity flying. And I think that's why so many people are getting injured and killed with wingsuit proximity flying, because people are, like you said, they're no longer respecting it in kind of the same way. It's no longer terrifying. It's no longer, oh, it's going to kill you. Oh, this is super dangerous. You don't even think in those terms with wingsuit proximity flying, even though you know it. Like you're aware of it. You understand because people are dying every year from it. But when you're experiencing it and doing it yourself, that's not the sensation you're having. There's a little bit of fear when you exit the cliff because the exit's important. But once you're flying, you feel like you have total control. You get this like almost false sense of security that, oh, I can go anywhere I want. If I want to fly by that tree, I can. If I want to fly behind that waterfall, no problem. I want to go in between those two rock pillars, easy, you know? And you start doing this and you never get this sense of like, oh, I'm terrified. All you do is just have this almost euphoric feeling of you're a bird floating in the sky, living this dream that you've had since you were a little kid. And that lulls you into a very false sense of security, because what you're doing is very, very dangerous. But for some reason, it doesn't feel like it is. So it's really hard to describe it, but I've kind of gotten into this place where I see wingsuit proximity flying, especially the proximity flying portion of it, as kind of like moths being drawn into a flame, right? I see the proximity flying as this big, raging, burning fire. And I see the wingsuit pilots as moths. And they don't even know why, but they're just being drawn to this just beautiful light. And then all of a sudden they get too close and they're just basically burned alive, you know? And that's how I see proximity flying. Proximity flying lures you in and you don't even realize that that bright, beautiful light is actually a flame that's about to set you ablaze, you know? And I think that's what's happening to us. And I know it not just because I'm watching it happen to people, but also because I've had it happen to me. I've actually experienced touching that flame and getting set on fire. I've impacted flat, solid granite at 120 miles per hour and somehow was lucky enough to not die, you know? So the sport is technical, it's challenging, and if you make mistakes, it's usually fatal, you know? So yeah, I mean, yes, it's complicated. Yes, it's difficult. Yes, yeah, it is what it is.